everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you this morning on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube station at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I am just delighted this morning to welcome Sonya Martino here. Sonya Martino is a Sankofa scholar and tour guide with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And she's here this morning to talk to us about a tour she leads for them called Lives Bound Together, the Washingtons and Ona Marie Judge of New Hampshire, which tells the story of Ona Judge's quest for freedom after having been enslaved by the Washingtons. She escaped to New Hampshire, but was pursued relentlessly by George and Martha Washington. So, Sonya, it's a fascinating story. It needs to be better known. Thank you so much for taking time to come visit us on the morning show today to teach us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. I've been excited about this show for weeks. Well, Sonya, could you start just by telling us about the Sankofa Tours in general? What are they? What kinds of topics do they cover? And what does the word Sankofa mean?
Sankofa comes from the country of Ghana, the African country of Ghana, and it means go back and get it. Go back and get your history, learn where you came from.
Oh.
Yeah. The tours run from May to November, and visitors can expect to hear and kind of visualize the early lives of African Americans in New Hampshire, not just Portsmouth, but all over New Hampshire. We have tours in Hancock, Warner, Exeter, and Dover, and the list keeps growing. There's so much history in New Hampshire, and none of this history is taught in schools.
Yeah.
So we have the important job of sharing that information.
Well, go back and get it is great. I love that because it makes history seem like it's an activity that we can all engage in, and it's certainly an important one. And we were talking a little bit before the show began about how Ona Judge's story deserves to be so much better known, and it's not taught in school. And I've had many people, as I mentioned to you, who learned about the topic and your visit to the morning show today say, that sounds fascinating, Mary. I didn't know anything about this, but I'm eager to learn more. So let's learn more. Let's start with, I hope you could tell us about who Ona Marie Judge was. Who was she? Who were her parents? How did she come to be enslaved in the household of George and Martha Washington?
Well, the story really begins with the Custis family. Daniel Park Custis was Martha Dandridge, later Martha Washington's first husband.
Okay.
They were married for 7 years. They had 4 children, 2 of which died before adulthood. They were children when they died. And one of them ended up raising a family before dying at the age of 27. And the Washingtons ended up raising 2 of Martha's grandchildren.
Okay.
So Betty, Ona's mother, was owned by the Custis estate. So when Martha Dandridge Custis married George Washington, she chose a group of her favorite enslaved Africans to bring with her to the Mount Vernon, George Washington's estate.
Yeah.
And Betty, Ona's mother, was a seamstress. Ona's father was Andrew Judge. He was an indentured servant from Leeds, England, who came to America in 1774. He was a tailor. So you can imagine Betty, a seamstress, and Ona's father, Andrew Judge, a tailor, working
in tandem.
Working together.
Yeah.
We do not know how consensual that relationship was, but we do know that Ona was given the middle name of Maria, and that was not something that there was not an African tradition.
Okay.
Ona Maria Judge Staines, and she was given her father's last name. So, yeah, that's how Ona became a part of the Washingtons.
So she was really born into slavery, even though her father was a white man.
Yeah.
Because by her maternal heritage was an enslaved woman, and so that was how she was born into becoming, in effect, property of the Washingtons. Well, what happened? Was her father, did he play a role in her life? Was he...
No, he served his 4 years of indentured servitude and never heard from again.
Okay, all right, okay. Well, tell us about Ona's experience in Philadelphia, because my understanding is that played a pivotal role in her destiny. So what did she see in Philadelphia, which we should add, and maybe you'll fill this in, that was the capital of the United States at the time, not Washington, D.C., but Philadelphia. After New York, it was passed on to Philadelphia, and so this was happening while George Washington was still president. So what was it that she saw in Philadelphia that was different from what she'd seen in New York or Virginia that triggered her starting to think about the possibilities of freedom?
Yeah, it's crazy. In 1780, Pennsylvania passed a law, the Gradual Abolition Act, which meant that anyone born after 1780 in Pennsylvania was an indentured servant until the age of 28.
Okay.
And if you brought enslaved Africans into Pennsylvania, you had to register them. And after 6 months, if they asked for their freedom, you had to give it to them.
That's remarkable. Just remarkable.
Yes.
Go Pennsylvania.
Yeah, they really
it was
got
the Quaker heritage, perhaps?
Perhaps, yeah.
Anyway, it's just another astonishing piece of American history that I don't think enough of us know about.
Oh, yeah.
But that's
that is
amazing.
True. And by the time, so this law took place in 1780, so by the time Ona got there, it was 1791, 92, if you can imagine that. And there were 6,000 free Africans in Philadelphia alone. Wow. So she would run errands for the Washingtons, and she saw these people like having paid jobs, being married, having
free.
A family, being free.
And that's a sizable community, 6,000 at the time, really sizable community.
Yeah, so she witnessed that, and I'm sure it baffled her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, she had also, in her time in Philadelphia, she also learned that Martha was going to bequeath her to Martha's granddaughter, Eliza Parke Custis, who was getting married. And so Ona learned how not valued she was by the Washingtons. She was going to be given as a gift.
She was property.
To Eliza. And Eliza was 19 years old, marrying a 35-year-old Englishman who had children of mixed race. He spent time in India. He had 3 mixed-race children, 2 of which he brought with him to America. So when Ona learned those 2, she was like, she decided to free herself.
Well, that sounds like it's such a dramatic kind of setting that you described, Sonya, just for the first time in her life, seeing free blacks, free African Americans, just living lives they had some agency over. They were nobody's property. They belonged to themselves, which we all should have the right to do. And so it's just so interesting to imagine how you would experience that for the first time, seeing that kind of like the doors of your imagination swinging wide open and going, oh my gosh, who knew this was even possible? But once you've seen it, I'm sure hard to go back to not having seen it. And then that followed by the kind of 1-2 punch of finding out that after living her whole life as part of the Washingtons household, no, you don't have any rights over your own body, over your own self, your own destiny. You are being given away as property, as a gift. And that would have meant going back to Virginia, presumably, and leaving this area where, leaving Philadelphia. So this was a transformational moment for her that led her to start imagining that a different way of life was possible, that you could live as a free black woman. Well, actually free mixed race woman, because her father was white. How did she do it?
Well, there was a community of free Africans in Philadelphia that were more than willing to help people find their freedom.
Okay, yeah.
And one of the men in Philadelphia was a formerly enslaved Richard Allen. Now, Richard Allen was a chimney sweep. He was a shoe cobbler, and he is the man he and Anselm Jones started the first independent black church in America that to this day is still in operation.
Oh, gosh.
The AME, the African Methodist Episcopal.
Yeah, all right.
And he was part of the Free Society of that group that helped people find freedom. There is a receipt from his time in the Philadelphia presidential mansion in March of 1796. And we believe she made contact with him.
Okay.
And asked for help at that point.
So she would have known about the work that he did, helping people find their freedom. And so she actually sought him out.
Correct.
Interesting.
And he was in the presidential mansion. Like, what an opportunity for her.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
There's also, because he was a shoe cobbler, there's also a receipt from her going to his shop in May of 1796.
Wow, interesting.
Yep.
Well, how did they pull it off?
Well, so she escaped Saturday, May 21st, 1796, and that was towards the end of George Washington's time as our first president. So as everyone in the house was packing up, she was also packing up her items and giving them to her friends to keep safe. So her act of packing wasn't anything unusual to anyone.
Interesting. Well timed.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it was a time of a little bit of chaos, too, with everybody packing up, including her, which would have been expected.
Yeah.
But she was packing for a different reason.
Yeah.
So.
I can't even imagine what her feelings were, the tension that she had at that point.
I'm sure excitement and fear.
Yeah.
Anticipation and worry.
Yeah.
Absolutely, at the same time. So then what?
So, as we know, Ona could not read at this point, but she was given specific directions to leave on this night, look for, and see, there's two different stories. There's one that says that she went on the boat that night and left. But then if you looked at the boat's manifest, the boat didn't arrive in Portsmouth until June. So it is believed that she spent time with a family in Philadelphia until they could find someone, a captain that wouldn't ask many questions, and a captain that was heading north. And they found it. It was a boat called the Nancy, and the captain was Captain John Bowles, and he was from Portsmouth.
Okay.
Yeah, he would take fish and lumber from Portsmouth and send it down or sell it down in Pennsylvania and New York.
Okay.
And from Pennsylvania and New York, he would take things like molasses, candies, candles, leather goods, boots, saddles, and why do I always pause? Boots and saddles. There's a third one, but for some reason my brain can't pick it up. Bridles. That's what it is.
Okay. Everything you need to ride a horse.
Yeah. So he would go once a month. He started off.
So it was a regular thing, and it's a normal thing for this boat to be going back and forth between Philadelphia and New Hampshire because there were goods being transported.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, he was a young 31-year-old white man, just wanted to be successful, and that's how he made a living. We don't know if he was an abolitionist or just a businessman that, just doing what he can to make a living.
Right,
but,
interesting.
Yeah, he is the one that brought her to Portsmouth.
All right, so that's how she winds up in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Well, what happens? What kind of life is she able to build for herself when she gets to Portsmouth? Does she stay in Portsmouth?
For the most part, she does. She was a part of the community. She had friends, and people knew who she was. She was kind of a celebrity.
Really?
People found out where she came from
because she'd been in the Washingtons
Correct.
Household.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And because George Washington was our first president, he was kind of like royalty.
Yes.
Right. But she was living at the home of, I'm drawing a blank. the Spring family. Pomp and Candace Spring, right in Portsmouth. And that was part of the early Underground Railroad in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Yeah, take my tour, you'll learn way more.
All right, okay.
But yeah, she ended up getting married and having children. And once her husband died in 1803, she spent the rest of her days in Greenland, New Hampshire.
Okay, all right.
Until her death in 1848.
Okay. Well, how did the Washingtons find out where she was, and what did they do when they found out she was in Portsmouth?
Well, as you know, the Washingtons were very popular.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted to share space with them. And Ona was Martha's favorite enslaved person. So Ona knew all of their friends and all of their friends' families.
Interesting.
And
okay.
before George was the most powerful man in America, prior to that, Senator John Langdon was the most powerful man of America. He was a president of the Senate. He was lived in Portsmouth with his family. He actually penned the letter to tell George that he was our first president. So
no kidding.
Yes, from
Okay.
Portsmouth, New Hampshire. How many
All
people
right.
know that? It's crazy. It's crazy.
People in Portsmouth probably all do, but
Yeah.
but outside Portsmouth, we need to know these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
So it was Senator John Langdon's daughter, Eliza Langdon, that spotted her as Ona was minding her own business,
Yeah.
running errands, working
Yeah.
in Portsmouth. She spotted her in
Okay.
Portsmouth and went home and said, "Dad, I didn't know that the Washingtons were in town." So
Oh my gosh.
that's how.
Oh.
Yep. And
Wow.
so she left in May of 1796. The Washingtons found out where she was in August
Yeah.
of 1796.
Wow. Okay.
And it didn't take long for
Yeah,
for
word
them
spread.
to start, trying to
Yeah.
get her back.
Yeah. And so, what did the Washingtons do? How did they try and get her back? And
Well, George wrote a letter to Secretary of Treasury Oliver Wilcott. And so Oliver Wilcott figured out that a boat must have taken her to New Hampshire.
all right.
So he wrote a letter to Customs Agent Joseph Whipple, who was from Portsmouth. George Washington gave him that title, so he
Oh,
would.
great. Okay, so he's indebted.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Joseph Whipple, even though he had freed his enslaved people years before, he was going to do this favor for George Washington. So he devised a plan to tell the community that he was looking for a domestic to hire to help his wife at home. So Ona went to what she thought was a job interview.
Oh my gosh.
So when she caught on that he knows way more than he should about her,
Yeah.
it quickly was revealed why that meeting was made.
Yeah.
And Joseph's letter back to George Washington pretty much said she will only go back to Virginia if you promise to free her after the death of you and of George and Martha. So when George received that letter, he was kind of beside himself. He was not going to allow this woman to
dictate terms.
correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And Joseph also gave kind of a warning to George Washington, saying, the favorability of enslavement in New Hampshire is losing its popularity, and it could stain his legacy if he continues further. He was already breaking laws while using our own government to obtain his property.
Oh, right.
So Joseph pretty much called him out on it.
yeah.
Yeah, it would
Yeah.
tarnish his legacy
Interesting.
because people knew who she was in Portsmouth.
Right.
They knew her connections.
Okay. Yeah. But, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Sonia, but there was a version of a Fugitive Slave Act operative at the time that would technically have meant that Washington was legally entitled
Oh,
to
correct.
bring, having once been his property, he was legally entitled at the time to bring her back. Am I correct about that?
You are
That-
absolutely
yeah.
correct, but that would have been made public.
It would have been made public.
And that's what-
And so the concern about legacy and reputation would have been something of a constraint, or at least something to consider in terms of actually operationalizing a plan to capture her and bring her back. Because without agreeing to her terms, that's what would have happened. So did he give up then, or did he continue?
Oh, he did not give up. His final attempt was sending their nephew, the Washington's, nephew, Burwell Bassett Jr. Burwell Bassett Jr. said he had plans to come up to New Hampshire for business, so they asked him to do a favor. And so one day, Ona, at this point, was married. She had an 18-month-old daughter, Eliza. And Burwell Bassett knocked on her door. And because Ona knew the entire family, when she opened the door, she knew whose eyes she was looking at. Yeah. And she knew why he was there.
Yeah.
So a conversation was exchanged, and she was not going to go with him.
Yeah.
She was determined to not, to keep her freedom, to not go back to Virginia, knowing what would happen if she did.
Absolutely.
So, there was another attempt that Burwell Bassett had, and Ona was able to avoid that as well. His first time at that house was not the last time at that house.
He came back?
He came back in the middle of the night to capture her and her baby.
So he was planning to take her captive.
Yes.
And what happened that thwarted that?
She got word from Cyrus Bruce, who was employed by John Langdon.
Oh, okay, Senator.
Said, you need to go. He's coming back tonight to come
Interesting.
get you.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
This is so cinematic, Sonya. It's so suspenseful. There's all these twists and turns, and you're rooting for her, but you're worried about her. But was that the end of it then, when she escaped in the middle of the night? And
yes.
Finally,
Yeah,
okay.
because George died in December of 1799, and she was never bothered again.
All right, okay. So it took the death of the former president for her to be able to relax into totally enjoying her freedom and not worrying about knocks on the door in the middle of the night.
Well, I don't know how much she enjoyed it, to be honest with you. You know, how I believe there was some aspect of her until the day she died.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at where she lived in Greenland, New Hampshire, out in the middle of the woods, that you had to cross a river to get to it. So she would have fair warning if someone tried to get her at that point.
All right.
Yeah, she kind of was hidden away. So I don't know how she felt after his death.
So there might always have been the threat of somebody coming.
Yeah, she was property of the Custis estate, and
because
they
that
were all
fugitive
still
slave
alive.
law would still have been in effect. Wow, what a story. Well, Sonya, you've had lots of opportunity to reflect upon this story. And I wanted to ask you, what do you feel her life story reveals about who Ona Marie Judge was as a person? And then also, what does it reveal about George and Martha Washington?
Well, about Ona, her tenacity, her power, her self-determination to get what she knew was her right to her own freedom. She wanted to make her own decisions, get married, have a child, learn to read, which she did when she came to New Hampshire. She joined a church and she learned to read. So she fulfilled typical things that people wanted at that time. She had 3 children. And she defied a sitting president.
She did,
that
didn't she?
blows my mind. Like
she had grit and gumption, totally.
Yeah, I get chills even thinking about it. The most powerful man in America.
That's
she was
right.
like, no.
Most powerful, but also beloved, with such a sterling reputation. And so, it speaks a strongly developed sense of self that she had, and of what her rights as a human being should be. And she claimed them. And also, she was strategic. I mean, she had a plan. And she was able to spot people who were being insincere or were trying to collaborate to get her back. She could spot what was going on, and then move to protect herself. And she was willing to, and she negotiated. So just a very impressive human being, and someone we should all know about. Because it's an inspiring story. And what does it reveal about the Washingtons?
Well, it reveals how they did not value people that didn't look like them.
Yeah.
That's in his, he didn't want this to stain his legacy.
Yeah.
So he was trying to do it the backhand way.
He's trying to have it both ways.
Yeah. So it doesn't make him look very good, does it?
Yeah. No, it doesn't. It suggests that since he was concerned about his legacy, it suggests that he knew that it was bad and it looked bad. And he probably knew that history would judge slavery in a certain way. That's what it suggests to me anyway, but he wanted, what he thought belonged to him. And so it suggests a certain level of what's the right word, egotism, dehumanization of somebody into his property, and his sense of his entitlements. An entitlement, I guess, is a good word for it. Well, following on that, I did want to ask you, because we're living in a time right now when there's a well-publicized movement in certain parts of the United States. Florida comes to mind as the most prominent example, where people are trying to control how African American history is taught and to restrict it and limit it. And this overarching sense somehow that, that we should just censor history whenever it comes to something that might reveal injustices, hypocrisy, and brutality. That some people would rather just not explore or be reminded of, ignore, basically. And George Washington is as close to a saint as you can get in American history. Famously, the cherry tree story and I Cannot Tell a Lie, and these things become part of, a legend that surrounds these mythical, to me anyway, sometimes seems mythical creatures of the founder and fathers, with George Washington being the most sainted of the group. Now, I'm curious to find out, why do you think it's important, perhaps, to chip away at that legendary quality about George Washington? Why is it important for us to remember and reveal, no, yeah, the guy owned slaves, and here was a woman who had claimed her freedom, escaped to New Hampshire, and he wouldn't let go. Why do you think it's important for us to understand these aspects, this story? It's part of American history.
Yeah, it's, when you think about when the first Africans came here in 1619, and how they were enslaved and used to build America.
Yeah.
And the other day I was thinking about the fact that, George Washington was our first president. As our first president, he could have stopped it.
Yeah, he had a lot of power.
He had a lot of power.
Yeah.
But the enslavement of Africans had been going on for almost 200 years at this point.
Yeah.
And all the most powerful people in America had enslaved Africans.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was the perfect opportunity to make things right.
Yeah.
And I feel like if he had, we would not be in the situation that we are now.
Yeah.
The systems that are in place would not be what they are now. And what a missed opportunity.
What a missed opportunity, absolutely. And I think that people don't think about this aspect of who George Washington was, both the missed opportunity and the fact that, no, he was a slave owner, and, the story about Ona Judge. Thomas Jefferson people know about because of Sally Hemings, and Thomas Jefferson, wrote about, in some ways, how, in some parts of him, that slavery was wrong, and yet he he continued to own slaves, continued to benefit from slave ownership, had this, who knows how consensual his relationship with Sally Hemings was, but there's a whole branch of the Jefferson family that are Hemings ancestors. And so people know that about Thomas Jefferson, but I don't think most people think about it in terms of George Washington, because he has this kind of sainted reputation. So I think it's really interesting and important to fill in this aspect that, no, he was also, as Jefferson, a man who owned slaves. And what does that tell us about him? And what does that tell us about what was going on at the founding of our country and the kind of inherent conflicts of values that are in our DNA as a country?
Yeah,
and it was, I
exactly.
like the way you put it, it was a missed opportunity, because he had a lot of power and he had a lot of influence because people did respect him and value him so much. Anyway, Sonya, thank you so much. It's just such a fascinating story, and I just loved hearing about it from you. It's somebody needs to make a movie about it. Thought about writing a screenplay because it just calls out for that, I think. And it would be a real gift, I think, to the country, because we need to know these stories, because it's part of our past and our present and our future. They emerge from our past. And so the more we understand what really happened, the more we can see how it tracks into what has happened in various malign ways, and we can correct for that. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Well, I wanted to share with people who may now want to learn more about Ona Judge, and I suspect people will, some books that are available. There is a book called Never Caught, The Washingtons' Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave Ona Judge by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. And there's a couple of children's books, which I was really pleased to find out about. One of them is called Runaway, The Daring Escape of Ona Judge by Ray Anthony Shepard. Here's the title for this book. And there's another children's book called Ona Judge Outwits the Washingtons. Good title. An Enslaved Woman Fights for Freedom by Gwendolyn Hooks. And here's the cover of this book. And these are all from the Newburyport Public Library, but I suspect they're in other libraries as well. And I believe there's also a young person version of the Never Caught book as well.
Yes.
So, but they can also come and take your tour.
Oh, I highly recommend it. I was born and raised in New Hampshire, and just being able to share these stories. I used to think New Hampshire was a boring state, but wow, the history that is there.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
played a pivotal role in America, I believe.
Yeah, well, clearly. And also Portsmouth itself, because it was a port, because that's where the ship that brought her from Philadelphia arrived. And so, so how can people get more information about your tours? Because there's some coming up, I think, a couple more this fall.
Yes.
And about the other Sankofa tours that are offered through the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire.
Well, I welcome everyone to visit the website at blackheritagetrailnewhampshire.org, and they'll find a plethora of information and links, and they can register for any of the tours. And yet we give tours all the way until November.
All right, so there's plenty of opportunities coming up.
Yes.
And plenty of history to explore.
Oh,
and to
it'll blow
see the
your mind.
locations, because I think that's powerful too, to be in the site where something happened, and to feel that kind of like, I always think of a holographic onion, because you start picturing the people who were there in the past, and you see the buildings. And so, Sonya, I can't thank you enough. You've just done a wonder. I could just imagine you're a great tour guide.
Thank you.
Because you've been a great tour guide of Ona Judge's story with us today. So thank you for taking the time to visit the morning show and to share with us this amazing story and this important history. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me. Yes, I believe the story needs to be told over and over again.
Absolutely. Well, we'll work on it. Thank you, Sonya. Take care.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's morning show, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Till then, be well, learn some history.